So let's ride together to ecstasy.
Hello and welcome to Tormentor radio show on Radio Libertaire. Who in the underground scene doesn't know S.P.K? Founded in 1978 in Australia, the band is an essential reference for all experimental and industrial music lovers. Today, we are very lucky to have one of its founding members, Dominic Guerin, on the phone. Dominic is now perpetuating the original essence of S.P.K through his projects Last Dominion Lost and Tone Generator and the Body Without Organs, which we will present in this interview. Hello, Dominic. How are you?
Oh, fine. Thanks very much for the interview, Lo. I'm looking forward to discussing things with you.
Oh, we have many questions for you tonight. So we're going to start from the very beginning and how you joined at the time in the early 80s the band S.P.K. How did it really start for you?
Well, I met Graeme Revell around 1977 when he came over from New Zealand. So he was a good friend. So I was there when he discussed with Neil the formation of S.P.K in 77 and just observed it as an outside observer to start with. So, in a way it was interesting because I actually introduced Neil to Graeme. So that's how things got started. Well, the first singles, which were quite interesting, were a sort of like a early sort of influenced by punk. Mm-hmm. And then later on it progresses to a post-punk sort of industrial sound. But what I want to emphasize is that early on there was Nihil's influence was very profound. And with Graeme, they're influencing philosophy. And what happened was that Graeme first went to France and spent a year in France, really? Just studying philosophy after the original singles. And then I moved to Europe to work with him because Neil was not prepared to leave Australia, and which was a strange decision, but it was his decision. And so that's when we started working on the Information Overload Unit, the first album, about 1980.
So you moved
You
moved to London, right?
Yes, that's right. Moved to London, and essentially didn't have much money, but we just sort of were living in a squat in London, and were inspired, by bands like Throbbing Gristle. Yeah. Who we had a loose association with because they did put out the original singles, Germanic, etc.
Were there other bands at the time in the squat you lived in?
We worked with a guy called Wilkins who played bass. So it was essentially just Wilkins, Graeme, Revell, myself, and his brother came over for about a year and a half to help as a technician,
You're speaking of Mr. Clean.
Yes, that's right. Mr. Clean, yeah.
So in 1981, you released the first tape called At the Crypt, which is alive. And this...
yes.
This was
that live recording at the Crypt. That was interesting. I think we were. That was in association with Nocturnal Emissions.
Yeah. On his label Sterile Records.
Yeah, I think they recorded it and released it.
Yeah,
that's right.
On tape, and it was re-released by all the Europa Cafe. I think it's 2 or 3 years ago.
That's correct. Yeah,
in Italy. So this was the very first show you did, was it, at the time?
It was the first show in Europe, that I remember. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then very fast you released information overload unit. How did that happen?
Well, that was an interesting time. You know, like when we were recording it, the Brixton riots were just going off down the road. Mm-hmm. And so we were aware of the sort of radical disconjuncture with society, you know, like people were living in abject poverty around Brixton and the need to rebel against Thatcherism, which was always an inspiration for SPK because we saw the dystopia, but we wanted to sort of interpret it sort of in a positive way for change, you know. So it wasn't just about nihilism and destruction, which is a key element, but we wanted to use it for positive, you know, in a constructive way.
Yeah. So from the beginning, you had a very political conscience and
yes.
Yeah.
It was influenced by the French very much in the French and German. You know, the philosophy of Deleuze and the German influence was by looking at the Baader-Meinhof and the Socialist Patients Collective, who are loosely connected in Germany to them. That was an early inspiration to us, you know, that hence the use of the name and the constant changing of the acronym SPK. We just didn't want to be an absolute thing, so we wanted to change everything as we went. That's why we just stuck with the acronym or the initialism SPK and changed the name for every project.
Yeah,
which did cause a bit of confusion, but that was intentional because we didn't want to be wanted to be in a constant change state of flux or change,
like a
which was
permanent revolution.
Yes, revolution is a key form of change. So we always thought that we didn't want to just describe the world. We would be part of the change by articulating a revolutionary ideas if we could, you know. Mm-hmm. And it was always coming from the left because we were seeing other people starting to do music that was, especially in industrial music, that was, to me, very, it didn't have any rigor. It just, in some ways, it regressing into fascism, which we certainly didn't want to do, which is a very easy thing to do because, you know, it's naughty or something like that. But it was a dreadful metaphor. We wanted to change the world in a sort of very much a left-wing position, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're going to change something, you don't want to oppress people. You want to liberate people.
That's why you choose the term Angstpop instead of industrial music.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it was an interesting time, the early 80s, you know. It was trying to do something post-punk because punk was so revolutionary in its concept. But we wanted to have content in it, not just to replicate what everyone else was doing, you know. And that's why I thought one of the most important records I ever heard was the second annual report by Throbbing Gristle, because it was so inspirational by its difference, you know.
Yeah. And what were your other influences before joining SPK? What did you listen to? Yeah.
Before, I think most of us were influenced by bands like Krautrock, German electronica, things like Neue Cluster, Harmonia. This was pre-SPK. They were very influential because they seemed to be the alternative music, you know, in the mid-70s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did concrete music had an influence on your?
Yes, I mean, also classical sort of modern music from Terry Riley through to even American, you know, classical music like John Cage and things like that that was a point of difference, you know, like you couldn't pin it down. It was unpredictable. and the different ideas floating in and out just seemed inspirational. So certainly that was a bit important.
Could you tell us a bit how you recorded information overload units at the time? Where was it recorded?
It was recorded in Brixton on a 4-track, but there was a lot of, we didn't have samplers at the time, so we had to use the tape to use like a quarter second or even shorter bits, and then we'd just do a contrast and add and building up the sound by incrementally just recording tiny little samples onto the tape, which took, like I remember I think it's Suture Obsession, it took like 2 weeks to do like a 15-second tape loop. That's how obsessive we were, just adding these little sounds together
it's insane.
Something that sounds completely insane and alternative.
And something that is so easy to do with computers, huh?
Yeah, today you could just slice anything up with gradual, sampling, with granular sampling even.
Which synthesizers did you use at the time?
The most important one was the EMS AKS, which is a classic sampler with a matrix that you put the little pins in to make the connection, which is still a wonderful thing because I see all these elaborate, beautiful, new synths with all their patching and everything like you can get today. But the matrix with these little pins was so neat in that you could make a connection without having all the wiring and spaghetti, what you have today.
Yeah. But it was very expensive at the time, no? Right?
It was, yes.
Yeah.
My brother brought back an AKS in 1974. I think he paid like £400 for it. And at the time, people thought, oh, that's so much money. Why did you do that? And today they're probably worth like,
10,000 euros minimum.
Indeed, yeah. And the irony.
And it's a very practical...
But some of the classic sounds that synth can create, because its oscillators were so pure. It had 3 of them. It had inbuilt reverb, spring reverb. It was just insane.
So you had to record everything you do with the keyboards because there was no recording possibility on that at the time.
Yeah, of course. You had to. I mean, that's why we were using tape, which is another archaic form of recording because everything's done digitally today. But the analog form always had a warmth and a natural distortion that was beautiful, which I think is lacking sometimes in digital recordings because they're clean and harsh at the same time, because any distortion from a digital source is much harsher than an analog source. So
it's fascinating because you talk very much about the beauty of the machines, the music from the machines. Yes. So you had this feeling of beauty, of novelty, and at the same time the political conscience. It's very interesting.
The political, we were a political band. It's just that we just used off-ball, like it's insane to think that we were talking about mental illness. Mental illness was something that both Neil and Graeme worked as psych nurses.
Yeah.
So they, so when they came across the manifesto by the Socialist Patients Collective, which is a separate SPK, as you know, that inspired them to, because they were working in the the fields of mental illness. So that was one of the first and great influences on the band, that we wanted to talk about the forgotten or the people left behind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way the society is treating those who cannot go into square.
Yeah.
I think we were reading things like Foucault, where he addressed those questions of people. In the past, there was much more tolerance towards mental illness.
Yeah.
But now it's been classified and defined, and that's when people started, rather than being part of society, being locked away either in a mental institution or, as they are today, locked away in a drug-induced state, because they're defined by that and they have to conform to convention.
Yeah, it was also a way to take their right away, because they were treated like animals at the time.
They still are.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah, whereas before there was more of a understanding, an actual role for people to play. They weren't looked down on, but not always in a negative sense, In some ways, the most insane people, not the most insane people, but if you were a bit of an eccentric, that was just part of your genius. Whereas today, if you're nonconformist, you're seen as being dangerous or something, Yeah.
You mean we can see in the way society treats insane people, we see in plain light what it does, usually with every other people, but in a much more clear
way. Well, it's like the outsider. It's not just insane people, it's an alternative.
Yeah.
If you're an immigrant, you can be treated that way as well. All your power is taken away from you, and you're looked down on, etc. It's a very pejorative way of looking at things,
Yeah.
Which is a sad state. Everything has to be almost conformist. I mean, it's part of a consumerist society, isn't it? That if you don't consume the right way, then you're not productive in the society.
Yeah. You're a defect, so you have to be removed from the machine.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating that you talk about this using machines, and that's what has always fascinated me. Using machines to talk about the way the huge machine works and denounce the machine in all the industrial movement.
It is time to take a little break with some rarities from S.P.K. As such, Funkentanz from S.P.K. Dokument recordings 1979 to 1983 on Villain on Demand in 2016, and then the Kult of the Human Head. It's live at London Electric Ballroom in 1983. It's an audience copy, released also on S.P.K. Dokument recordings on Villain on Demand in 2016. So we continue our phone interview with Dominic Guerin, aka Tone Generator from the mythical industrial S.P.K. and Lost Dominion Lost band in a Tormentor radio show on Radio Libertaire.
Could you tell us a bit more about Nihil? Because there seems to be very few information and his role in S.P.K.
Oh, well, this is a fascinating question because it goes right back. You know, when we first started the band, it was almost like Niall was presented as a mental patient himself rather than being what he was, which was a psych nurse. And his interest in mental illness goes right back because he was working with people in it. And as I said before, the idea was to put an alternative view towards mental illness. It was a very important aspect. I mean, what we were talking about in terms of industrial society was about how it affects people's mental health, as opposed to just sort of reflecting the industrial society in which we live in. Mm-hmm. And Neil was very influential in that, you know, together with Graeme. He was an interesting person in that he was very private, you know. He never left Australia. He only did a couple of, I think I can only remember about 2 or 3 performances. I think 3 that he ever did. He was just very insular, quite a shy guy, but incredibly intelligent.
Yeah.
And he had a very strong influence on the band.
Yes, and I think that his influence has been maybe, you know, not emphasised enough because, you know, the nature of the personality of Graeme Revell, which is a very dynamic, he's a very intelligent person. And also I think that he always had an aspiration to take the band over. But when the band first started, it was definitely a sort of inspired both by him and Neil, you know. And Neil got more marginalised as the band went on. You know, like at the time when I joined the band, we were in London and he wasn't there. So he was back in Australia. So Graeme increasingly saw it as more of his particular band, and Nihil was left behind. We did come back to Australia for the second album, Leichenschrei, which Neil was on as well. But when we went back and toured the States and things like in 82, he was sort of like even more marginalised, which I think inevitably contributed to his depression, which inevitably led to his suicide later on in 84. Mm-hmm.
In 1981, he released on his side, at the time he was in Australia and you were in England, a 7-inch called Seesaw Chamber Music. Almost at the time you were...
Superb music. That was done on M². It was sort of like S.P.K, but it was really Neil's solo project, whilst we were recording, you know, like Information Overload Unit. He was doing his own thing in Australia, which was released as an S.P.K product. It was like there was 2 forms of the band working independently but collectively, if you understand.
Yep. He did that with his woman at the time, huh?
Yes, Margaret. Yeah. Yes. There was an irony in that because he was talking about suicide. They were talking about a suicide pact. And I thought that this was, you know, into people like Mishima, the Japanese. And I always thought it was a joke. You know, I didn't take it seriously. But the conditions of the suicide later on were based on the fact that she was dying. And he said that if she did die, he would commit suicide. And essentially that's what occurred in 1984. which is really incredibly sad because I think he would have done incredible music, because that project you're just talking about produced some incredible stuff that is quite legendary and so unique, you know. It'd be nice if you could play some of that.
I don't know if we have planned those, but we
well,
will.
you can edit that one out.
Yeah, exactly. We will add that somewhere. Then there was a live recorded in 1982 called The Last Attempt to Paradise.
Last Attempt at Paradise, yeah.
That was repressed by Vinyl on Demand in the big vinyl box.
Oh, yes, that's right, yes. Yeah. Well, Frank Mayer does some amazing stuff in his reissues there to get everything back on vinyl.
Yeah, it is a crazy label, I must say. It's probably the last big label that big in independent scene, that
yes,
putting so much attention on the object and how it should be re-released. I found myself the box set, the vinyl box set, at the time, and I was very surprised and could not believe that someone were crazy enough to release something like that. How does that happen with the band, this re-release?
Well, it is incredible, because it's like, what is it, 35, 40 years now since a lot of this stuff we recorded this stuff. So I find it both inspirational and crazy that people still find this stuff relevant today. You know, I mean, when we were doing it, it was, I think, it seemed to me to be radical. But today, the content, you know, like the visual content as well as the musical content in the past was radical. But today we're in a different world with the internet and the exposure of so many different ideas and things, that it's difficult to be, as, for want of a better word, shocking.
Yeah.
You know, today it's just like de guerre, you know, everyone's doing it, you know.
By the way, you were very influential in the visual content of the band at the time, right?
Yes. Well, from after I started working with Graeme in the second album, but one of the things that Graeme, because of his huge intellect, he didn't suffer fools gladly, and musicians were just seen as disposable items to him. Yeah. Consequently, throughout the history of the band, you'll see that there's been a lot of amazing musicians that have played with him, but he just used them like tools to be used. And I realised that very early and moved into the graphic or the visual side of things, and that gave me a level of independence, at least for the 3 years I was in the band, where I knew I could do my own thing, which was it didn't interfere with his musical content, and that way I could carry on. And he always agreed that I was part of the band, even though I was contributing to the visual content of the band. So for the last year and a half, I just concentrated on presenting the visuals, which was fantastic, you know. I really enjoyed it. Yeah. I also started up Twin Vision, my own video company, in 1982, which is very, very early for video distribution, and, worked with other people to, putting out their visual content as well. So essentially I had a degree of independence inside the band without the threat of being sacked as a musician, which seemed to be inevitable with Graeme, you know.
Yeah, because in 82 there were a lot of musicians joining the band and then leaving.
Yes, there is a demarcation that you must realise between, say, 79 to 83, and then when Graeme, I think he married Sinan, put her in the band, felt an obligation to make a lot of money, got a relatively large record advance in 1983.
Yeah.
And I think he felt obligated to do slightly more commercial music to pay that obligation back. And that was the point that, like there was no real room for either my imagery or my content to continue. So I was very happy to leave the band at that point. And so that dichotomy between the original band, the first few years, and the later SPK, which is a much more commercial product.
Right.
It's more new wave direction. But why did no one change the name? Because the sound it's not the same band anymore.
Well, that's what I have always said. I've never understood why he did. I think there is a reason for it. I think that at one point Graeme started an alternative band which was called, with his wife actually, Senan, the first sort of thing, which was an alternative band called Dance Macabre. And that was relatively unsuccessful, at least commercially. So I think he thought that the way to progress it was to use the SPK name, but to change the sort of vibe or the musical content to a more commercial one with a degree of success. I don't know. But it was not my sort of thing. I've always questioned why he didn't change the name, but I suggest to you that it was just a decision that made sense to him at the time. I'm not going to criticise Graeme because, he was the driving force from the start with Neil. So even though he did turn it into a more commercial band, that was his decision, and that's where he parted company.
Could you explain us a bit more about the video Despair that you released in 1982 and that was re-released in 2008 on DVD? Could you explain us?
I do like the just a statement here. I do like the original VHS copy because there was no compromise in the editing, I think when it was released later on, they were a bit scared about the content at the end, and it was sort of dumbed down to a certain extent because I was actually using film of real dead bodies, which we got from medicals because I knew some people who were doing medicine at the time and got access to them, which was radical content, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But there was other things on that Despair, it was, again, if you look back at the time, the zeitgeist was completely different. In 1980, you did not have access to all this stuff, which is relatively, it may be easy to come across in 2020 or 2020s, you know what I mean? Because of the internet, when there was, virtually none of this content existed at the time. Yeah.
So you went into morgues for that, for the original videos.
We managed to do that, and then we animated the bodies independently, which was a sort of a radical and maybe disrespectful, but we thought that it was, an alternative view that needed to be said, and it reflected the sort of level of madness that we wanted to incorporate into the project. So it seemed to make sense at the time.
So, did you have the same ideas to shock the people and show something other on live performances in concerts?
Yeah, well, that was depended on the audience, It was interesting because when we toured America in 1982, there were certain venues that we thought we could show the content, and other ones where because there was a mixture of Super 8 and slides. We didn't even have video projectors in those days. So we had to do morphing of imagery with multiple projectors to get the effect that you can get on a video today. And so it depended on the audience whether we felt we could give the full show or dumbing it down to a certain extent.
So we are now going to play some oldies but goodies, as such as Postmodern, issued on Leichenschrei in 1982 on Thermidor, and 1983 on Side Effects, and also re-released on the Mute Grey Area a decade later, and Old Europa Cafe in 2019. Then two tracks from the compilation Auto da Fe, Slogan and Meccano, both released in 1983 on Walter Ulbricht Schallfolien and Mute Grey Area in 1992.
Remove the rectum itself with the
One of the doctors stole my mind out of my head and he's going to use it to make a lot of money. They're trying to force me to do abnormal things by working on my spinal cord. Electricity passing through wires in my body, and experimenting on television, trying to seduce me by frequency vibrations.
It is important to make any incision in your body in such a way that it will not be apparent when the body is lying in a coffin. It is very distressing to relatives when they see any mutilation.
Someone in this block is chopping little girls out. Two men have been trying to get into my vagina to stop me from giving the news. The manager of the corporation tried to give me syphilis by wiping his cock on my sandwich.
I remove the rectum itself with the pelvic organs.
Someone's injected mercury into my brain to make me do things. They're trying to steal my secrets by using electric shocks.
Paralysons, on t'en défonce. Nous vaincrons. We will win. S.P.K, 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 S.P.K. Okay. Mama, mental health, give the inner peace. Mama, mental health, give the inner peace. Mama, mental health, give the inner peace. Mama, mental health, give the inner peace.
You're listening to Tormentor Radio Show on Radio Libertaire, and we are still in communication from Paris to Portugal, where Dominic Guerin is currently based.
We now gonna start, if you agree, to speak about your second project that you start in 1992, known as Last Dominion Lost. That was released on Tesco at the
with
time.
John Murphy. Yes, the first album, The Tyranny of Distance, was with John Murphy and John Evans. That was recorded in 1992, I believe, in Sydney. That was sort of recorded on an 8-track. And that was fun, you know. I mean, I loved working with the legendary John Murphy.
I can imagine. How did that happen?
Well, we were old friends. You know, John had worked periodically with S.P.K. in the past, and John Evans is a remarkable individual. He's one of the smartest individuals I've ever met. He's very quick and amusing, and it seemed like a natural thing to get together and produce music. I was actually living with John Evans, and John Murphy would drop in and just do his magic, so that was fun. It was interesting how it was released, because for a long time we had recorded the album, but it was never released because we were under the impression it wasn't finished. And John took it to England and just decided the time was right just to release it, because we hadn't worked on it. And in the end, it worked out. I mean, I listened to it recently, and it's remarkably good for something that we just thought was half finished, you know.
And it was just before the big digital rush. So it still has this old school experimental industrial sound.
Yes.
Was it a choice for you, or?
Well, I was lucky because at the time I was living in the house with all these synthesizers that were my brother, who is a remarkable individual. He's got one of a world-class synthesizer collection, and he was storing it at my house where I was living with John, and we thought, hey, let's jump in there and do an album, and that's how it came about, really. And then, as you know, later on in 2008, The Last Dominion Lost was reformed, or 2007, I think, and did a couple of albums which, without me, actually. I later on in 2017 rejoined the band, you know, because I had other things to do. You know, I had children to bring up and things, and it wasn't until then that my renaissance in music started again. So I had about a 20-year hiatus where I didn't do much.
And no music at all during that period?
No. John Murphy and John Evans, who now is based in Berlin, continued Last Dominion's Lost on with another person called Julian Percy. And that's the current lineup. And also later on they got
Ash Wednesday.
Deconstructor Bergerman, also into the band, who's got his own project.
And there were also, in addition, Ash Wednesday, who is known for working with Einsturz Neubauten.
Yes. I was just talking about that last night with John and Julian. Yeah. So, so now we're currently working on a new album in Portugal, which is exciting. I mean, I just left the studio to take this call, actually. It will be interesting to see the latest album that should come out later in the year. We keep on saying this is going to be the last album, which is the same as what we said in 1992, and this is like the fourth, I think. Or maybe the fifth. This will be the fifth album.
Yeah, but you didn't work on Abomination of Desolation in 2017, the year you rejoined the band.
No, that was finished before I did that. I mean, the first thing I did was 2018, I toured Scandinavia. But after that, it was only after the release of that album that I decided to come back and join the collective. So no, that's independent of me.
So you're planning to tour again with Last Dominion Lost?
Yes.
Oh, that's a great news.
And I've also got my own project, which is The Body Without Organs, Tone Generator and The Body Without Organs, which I released an album last year as well, called The Normalization of Response.
We're gonna play 2 tracks from that album too. If you want, we can start to speak of it. Mm-hmm. This is a self-released album.
Yes, it's being released by, I think it's 4IB Records in Singapore. My friend Jared Tang is releasing that album again in a much bigger release, and it'll have a few more tracks on it as well. Being able to do that on a CD, you can put more music on it. So that should be released. So that's my next thing. When I get back to Sydney in a month's time, that's when I'm going to send the files over, and that should be out relatively soon, which is exciting to get it out because it was only released on a limited 100 CD release from Inner City Sounds from Sydney. But it was fantastic. It sold out immediately, so that was good.
I was surprised to discover that you have a track that is linked to SPK period. You have a track called that we're going to play tonight, Nihil's Ballroom.
Yes, it is it's a sort of like a mismatch of different ideas, experiences, and even sampling of SPK in it. So it's like my final statement to the band in a way.
Yeah. Can you give us more information on how you work on Tone Generator and The Body Without Organ? Do you use the same technique, the same material for that album, or did you build a specific one?
Well, techniques are different these days. You know, I use digital things, although I do use things like I've still got access to the AKS synthesizer. I use sampling a lot more. I'm a lot more confident in my own vocal, be it what it is, you know. So it's more, I suppose, trying to be more experimental rather than, I mean, I love, classical experimental music. So in some ways it could be seen more in the tradition of people like John Cage even, that sometimes it's minimalistic, sometimes it's things, but it's not essentially just noise. But I'm not against noise music, so it's a hybrid of industrial noise, experimental.
What is your link with Japanese noise movement? Do you have any...
Well, I mean, only in the sense that I'm friends with a lot of noise artists from that. Like in 2018, I did a show in Istanbul, Noise Istanbul, where I played with people like KK Null. So it's more just admire these people because the intensity is so unusual, and it just takes you on a journey, that a lot of other forms of music don't do. I've got ideas for working on an album called Concrete Slab, which is a bit more of a noise album. I've got also ideas of working on stuff that's more, almost like neoclassical experimental stuff like Martin Subotnick, because I've got another synthesizer that's very, inducive to that in this, he worked with other people. Yeah, so it's a sort of mismatch between noise, experimental, industrial, etc. That's my, I'm open to all those genres. I don't want to be fixed into just it's just industrial music, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is a difficult one because, that's always in a constant state of flux anyway, What is industrial music? I mean, I just think it's alternative, sometimes noise, but I think the difference between maybe noise and industrial is that industrial tends to have more of a narrative to it.
Yeah.
Whereas noise can just be the purity of the sound,
With no message behind, like Mesbro or Dissecting Table.
Exactly. Yeah.
it's time to have a new break with 3 tracks from last Dominion Lost. The first will be The Will to Win, issued on the Tyranny of Distance, Tesco Organization 2004. Then Empty Tombs, The Tyranny of Distance from the same album. And then Cesium Sunrise on Towers of Silence. And that was issued on the Epicurean and Silken Tofu in 2014. You are still between Paris and Portugal with Dominic Guerin on the phone in Tormentor Radio Show on Radio Libertaire.
Can we have an idea of how the new Last Dominion Lost album is gonna sound? You already did record some tracks, or?
Yes, we're just doing it at the moment. So it's a interesting variety of different sounds. We're coming from different people, so it's all just coming together at the moment. You'll have to wait to hear what we come up with, because we're just at the start of it at the moment. We've been working on it for 4 days, so it's a proto project, if you know what I mean. But we're all excited about it.
So you don't have a defined idea already. It's you still experimenting, and or do you?
Oh yes, I mean, it's going to be influenced by all different things, like the sounds from the booklet easel, the sounds from the AKS, the sounds from different equipment we've got, found music, samples, all sorts of things. Just not trying to be boring. We're trying to look into the, at the moment, the world seems to be in a state of despair. We want to critique that without necessarily being too much into, we want to look at the possibility of redemption, and the future, rather than just being into a dystopian state that we find the world is in at the moment. So it's a mixture of positivity and negativity, if you know what I mean. The negativity of describing the dystopian world of events that are going on at the moment, and a positivity to sort of see an alternative, a difference, to sort of inspire the possibilities for the future rather than being totally negative. But, sometimes that's difficult to do when you're living in a world that is so in crisis. And we find ourselves just at this present state, both economically, spiritually, emotionally, there's a lot of change. So we're trying to sort of critique that as best we can and trying to be not too negative, because we want to sort of look on the positive, or between the good versus the evil. We want to make a drama that makes sense, not one that just is totally into dystopia. We want to have a look at the possibilities of something, that a brighter future. So that's the sort of feeling we have for this album. It's not going to be all negative. We're going to try to sort of create an alternative views towards things, as best we can.
What could be for you a positive future?
Well, I think that we can look at a world that is not so based on consumer capitalism, and looking on a world where we can have a collective view of things, and not looking at the individual as the primacy of everything, it's all about you. We want to look at the sort of collective we, and seeing that the possibility of working towards things that can be done, not, trying to attack the critique of capitalism and consumerism, where everything is just, a lot of things aren't very intellectual. They're just at a base level, So we want to, as best we can, critique things in a way that is alternative to what I see as negative is the way that the world is interpreted by the elite, the rich that dominate everything. The Elon Musk, the billionaire bullshit, of going to Mars or something like that. Everything that's just consumed, it's spat out without any meaning behind it. It's the consumerism in art, which is just a one-day thing, you move on to the next. There's no meaning behind it. We want to look to a future where there is more meaning for the individuals, not just the individual, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That we can work together to solve these problems, rather than just putting your hands up and saying, no, it's all too difficult. and then sort of bunkering down and just putting everything on. It's all about me and the individual. We want to work to a world where there isn't just the individual that's the chosen one, the new Donald Trump, which is the most divisive and destructive forces, because they're only looking after their own individual, vision of the world, rather than taking a broader, longer term, positive thing that could be achieved. I'm not saying that we live in that world today, but there is alternatives,
Yeah.
In some sense, that is political, but it makes sense to work in a collective sense rather than an individual sense.
Yeah, of course. So it's also more, I won't, not say religious, but more spiritual, open to differences.
Yeah, not that spiritualism comes in many forms. I'm not talking in terms of conventional spiritualism or anything like that. I'm just sort of saying that something that has more meaning behind it can be enlightening in the sense of, so people as individuals themselves feel part of something that is beyond themselves, in that sense spiritual, not in the conventional religious sense of the word.
Yeah. How did you regard all the problems that your country did face environmentally lately? You had lots of fires and...
Oh, yeah. Don't get me... The most disturbing aspects is the conventional political state of Australian politics. It's just terrible, the lack of insight into global warming, the amount of greed and corruption that exists not only in Australia, but I'm just sort of talking about my experience because that's where I'm living, and it is disturbing, So in a way, when you do art, you can reflect the duty, I guess, is to question and critique things, not just to describe things, but to actually try to suggest an alternative. It's an obligation in a way to let the filth and the disgusting influences of the political class dictate everything. And I know it's very questionable about to what extent you can be successful, but if you don't try, then there's no point,
Mm-hmm. It's strange for us because we see Australia as a massive continent with very few people living there, but still not being connected to nature. Do you think it's because of the big cities?
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. There is a disconnect because there's just such on one level, it's such a rich country and it's based on the fact that the exploitation of nature, all the minerals that are exported, the fact that they don't make a distinction between the uranium and the coal and everything that's exported from it just for making money and not looking at the damage it does to the environment. It's like it's asleep, and it's just accepting the fact that it's the lucky country that doesn't have to do anything. It just exists on the fact that the rest of the world takes all our products from us, and we just sit back and say, oh, that's good, with no real intellectual base behind it. It's just in some ways a reflection of the meaninglessness of the society, because it's not based on it hasn't got a concrete analysis of what it's doing, it's just saying, we're doing well because we're a great exporter of products that you don't have to do anything, it's just dig it up and send it overseas, Mm-hmm. It's disturbing because there's no looking at the damage that exporting coal does, or products like that. There's an innate contradiction in it, where people seem to live in these mega cities and they are alienated from the natural environment, and they don't give the indigenous population credit. You know, it's like they deny the existence of such a great, rich heritage that the Indigenous people have, you know.
Now it's time to go back to some more music with Last Dominion Lost and 3 titles, Stagma from Towers of Silence, Shell in the Chamber from Snowdrops from a Curate's Garden, issued in 2015 on the Epicurean, and then Wolf's Quint on Morochien on Trapdoor Tapes in 2016. and you listen to Tormentor Radio Show on Radio Libertaire. This is the final part of our phone interview with Dominic Guerin, known as Tone Generator, formerly active in SPK and Last Dominion Lost.
Do you already have planned some tour, or is it too far to plan it?
Tour?
Yeah, some concert dates.
Well, at the moment, I am going to do some shows when I get back in Australia, but beyond that, I think we are planning, but at the moment, the biggest emphasis, because we've been away from each other for such a long time because of COVID, etc., which is to concentrate on the recording and then take it from there. I mean, at the moment, that's what we want to do rather than tour. Because, I mean, I do want to tour, but it's just the amount of time we have together, because we can't always get together because John Evans lives in Berlin, Julian Percy lives in Portugal, I live in Australia, Till lives in England. So we're living in like 4 different countries. So it's while we're together, we might as well record. So that's why we're here for a month to record all together. It's difficult enough to get together to tour, but the recording is the major influence we've got at this stage for the next year.
Do you have already a name for that album, or is it too early to say something?
We sort of got a number of names, but we haven't come up with one yet, so I don't want to blurt one out just in case we change it, So...
Okay, we'll come back to you just after the release. Do you have an idea on when it should be released and whose label is it going to be on?
Well, there's a number of different labels actually that we could release it on. So I don't want to sort of say, but it's sort of depending on the product, I guess. We'll wait and see. It's all just very early doors here on that one.
Too early to speak of. Okay, then I'm going to thank you very much for that long interview. We were delighted to have you finally.
Well, I would like to thank you too, because it's a great opportunity to talk and get some ideas out there. So thanks very much.
You're welcome. We just hope that you're going to come to France for a date for Last Dominion Lost. That will be very interesting, since I'm counting on you for that one.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I look forward to that.
So I'm going to let you go back to work, because I think people are waiting for you.
Thank you, and I'll hear from you soon.
Enjoy your time in Europe. Hope you have a wonderful weather.
Oh, it's superb here at the moment. I don't know if you've ever been to Portugal, but it's my first time here and I'm really enjoying it.
So have a nice time and thank you again. Wish you a nice day, Dominic.
So,
cheers, mate. Yeah. Same to you. Appreciate it.
So, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure and privilege. And before we say definitely goodbye, here's a selection of 3 more titles from Last Dominion Lost and Tone Generator and the Body Without Organs. First is Matthew Del Mortis on Abomination of Desolation. Then from Tone Generator and the Body Without Organs, Ballad of the BWO on Normalization of Response. Issued on Inner City Uprising last year, and N.H. Hill's Backroom on the same album, same label. Okay, goodbye. And thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Cheers.
Oh, thank you. Bye.
What kind of... Can I rest here? Go on, 20? What kind of... Where?